Okay, so lesson 8, the three minds. This is a continuation again of um, the foundations of Gnostic psychology. Last week we talked about the three brains, now we're going to talk about the three minds, right? And it's just one mind that we have, right? We don't have three minds, but there are three aspects of that same mind. That's why we chose the title. But it's just one mind, but there are three aspects of our mind. Okay. So first, let's begin by talking about what the mind is. Okay, because we have this idea that that the brain is the mind. Okay. This is why I chose this quote from Master Samael. Whoever supposes that the mind is the brain is completely mistaken. The mind is energetic, subtle, and can become independent of matter. It can, under certain hypnotic states or during normal sleep, transport itself to very remote places in order to see and hear what is happening in those places. Okay, so we're going to get a little bit into the metaphysical aspect of gnosis. Okay, this is certainly something that Dr. Sampernia has proven with his research. Right, I've mentioned before how he works in the resuscitation department, and he has been separating patients that go through strokes. And some of those patients, he says about 10% of the patients that were clinically dead and their brain stopped and their heart stopped. When they come back, some of them report memories of what was happening during the time that they were actually dead, right? So then that opens the question of what part of them was perceiving the reality of the moment, right? Or what was happening in this three-dimensional aspect.
Sorry.
So, right, we have this idea that our brain is the one that perceives everything. And if our brain shuts down, then there goes life and everything, right? So this very interesting research that's going on, it's a global research that's been happening for the past 10 years or so. It's called the Project Awake. So I invite you guys to look for this research.
Okay. The project of what? Brain?
It's called Awake. Okay. Let me write the name down for you guys. Cool. There are some very good interviews on YouTube. Dr. Sam Hernia. Okay. So yeah. Anyway, I'll try to email you guys the links. There's an interview that he did in NPR radio. It's like a 30-minute interview. It's very profound. You know, it begins to shed light on this notion that we've been given by ancient spiritual traditions that, you know, we're a physical body, or rather that we are a consciousness or a soul that has a mind, that has a physical body, and has an emotion, and has emotions and a physical body, right? So then this is just another proof that, or another research that begins to prove what the ancients already know and what they've been telling us, right? So very, very important research. I only found out about this guy like a year and a half ago. Very, very interesting. So then what is the mind, right? If the mind is not something physical, if the mind is not our brain, then what is it? The mind is a substance or an energy, okay? It is a substance or an energy that we as a soul or as a spirit uses to, one, express itself, and two, to perceive the world, okay? Like I said, we've been saying before, the mind, the emotions give us perceptions, right? And then the physical body gives us sensation. Okay, so you need a mind to take in and interpret those sensations. Okay, so that's what the mind is. It's a substance. It's a type of energy. Okay, think of it as a vehicle that you use, right? In the same way that you use a plane to transport yourself to a different place, you use the mind to go to this different places. And the mind is not only locked into the brain or to your physical body. You can use your mind to find out what's happening in other places where your physical body is here. Okay. One of the examples of this is a guy that goes by the name of Igno Swam. Okay, and again, I think I've mentioned it before, but he was able to do a remote viewing, which is what they call this technique, a remote viewing of the planet Jupiter before we had any pictures of Jupiter. Okay, this was back when the NASA hadn't sent a probe to to Jupiter and taking pictures and whatnot. So he entered the state of meditation. He concentrated, and he went all the way to Jupiter, right? And then he came back and said to scientists, "Well, Jupiter looks like this, like that, and it has this ring around it, blah blah blah." And then when NASA years after, when NASA sent a probe and they took pictures of it, guess what? It was the same way that he has described. The CIA also led very profound experiments on this remote viewing thing, and you can Google all about it. Everything's on the internet now. So it's called CIA experiment remote viewing. Okay, and they also call it well, the whole question of astral projection enters into that too, but. In essence, the CIA was trying to prove if people could actually transport their mind and see what was happening in other places while they're physically here, right? So conspiracy theories say that they actually used these agents to spy on the Russians back in the Cold War and all that stuff. Pretty exciting stuff. Okay, so then the mind, like I said, is a substance, it's an energy. The brain is not equal to the mind, or it's not the mind. So the brain is kind of like the computer, right, or the CPU, and the mind is the antenna or the receptor. Okay, so we do need the physical brain so that physically we can see the images, right? But again, the mind is like the antenna or the receptor. So the mind is a substance or an energy that the consciousness uses, and the consciousness is the one that controls this computer, right? Of course, the consciousness, the liberator, or the free consciousness, or the consciousness trapped under the ego, right, or conditioned by the ego. Okay, so we say that there are three types of mind. The first, Master Samael says, we can call the sensual mind. The second, we can call the intermediate mind, and the third, we can give the name of the interior mind. Okay, basically, the three aspects of these minds is that the sensual mind takes all of its information from the five senses. Okay, so everything that we can hear, smell, taste, touch, and feel. Okay, that is the information that this aspect of the mind can perceive. Okay, and then once we acquire this information, then we begin to form theories about what we're perceiving. Okay, so this is where we form what we call the intermediate mind. So the intermediate mind creates theories, holds dogmas, beliefs, morals, etc. of what we are perceiving physically. Okay? And then we have the interior mind, which is the mind that puts us in touch with the hidden aspect of the universe or the hidden aspect of life. Okay? Things that we cannot perceive, like souls, like spirits, like different entities that are within the environment, etc. Okay, and again, it's the interior mind, the one that we can use to begin to see these hidden realities that are within this universe. We've been talking about how the universe it's not really a universe; it's a multiverse, right? It's a multiverse that has different dimensions. The same way that we have a three-dimensional aspect to this universe, we also have a fourth-dimensional aspect, a fifth-dimensional aspect, etc. And there are different beings that are living in those different dimensions that have physical bodies that vibrate at a higher frequency than our physical body. So we can perceive them, right? Because when we use our sensual mind, we can only perceive a certain spectrum of colors, right, or of light. So whatever is vibrating at higher frequencies, we cannot perceive. Same thing with sounds, right? There are sounds that we can't hear, but dogs or animals can hear, which doesn't mean that they don't exist, right? They are here, present. So when we open our interior mind, we begin to hear, to see, and to experience more things that are here in this moment that we cannot perceive using just our sensual mind. Okay. So this is in essence what this lecture is about, and what this lecture proposes, that we need to open our interior mind, which is the one that's going to give us the ability to perceive the mysteries of life, right? And allow you to have direct experience of everything that the ancient religions and mystical traditions have always said about souls, about God, if there is a God, etc., etc. Right? Okay, so let's enter a little more into detail. So the sensual mind, like I said, takes all of its information from the five senses. Okay, so the only thing that it can perceive is three-dimensional objects or things that are in this three-dimensional plane. Okay, since if we only use this mind, then we won't be able to accept the fact that there is anything else besides what we can see, feel, hear, touch, and smell, whatever I'm missing. Okay? So this is where materialistic skepticism comes about, right? People that say, okay, I only believe in what I can see, right? Whatever I can perceive with my external senses, that is life, and that's it, right? So this type of mind, it's a very closed mind, okay? It's what we call pseudoscience, or this is where pseudoscience comes from. It's a type of incomplete science, okay? And this is why I find that we are in a very exciting time, because science is getting more, or what I see is that science is actually corroborating a lot of the things that these ancient traditions say, right? A lot of the things that these ancient mystics perceived from the universe, but with using their interior mind, okay? They went beyond this mere this sensual or sensorial mind, and beyond the intermediate mind, and had direct experience of ghosts, of spirits, of other planets, of life in other planets, etc., etc. Right? Okay, so.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry.
Yes.
What about when you're dreaming? Is your interior mind, which is functioning there, even though you are not conscious about it?
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily. Could be your because when you're dreaming, you're still kind of locked up into not necessarily the sensual mind, but the intermediate mind. The intermediate mind is projecting images. Okay. Only when you have a lucid dream or an astral projection, then your interior mind begins to open up. Okay. So this is why the yoga of sleep is very important in these studies. We need to begin to learn how to open that mind, how to awaken ourselves here, so we can awaken in the dreams. Because when you're dreaming, you're in another dimension. Okay. Okay. So since we are kind of entering this period that we are entering today, actually, which is Ash Wednesday. It's like a Catholic or a Christian tradition. Figure we give it a Christian touch, right? In the Christian scriptures, they say that there were three types of people that followed the Christ. Okay, and now we're looking at the Christ, of course, as a mythological person or as a spiritual master, right? The events that are narrated in the Bible does not mean that they necessarily all happen physically, but what's more important is the symbology behind the story, right? So, thank you. So, they say that three types of people followed the Christ. Some were the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and then his close disciples, right? So, the Sadducees were those who were always rejecting the Christ or his teachings, okay? And the Christ here represents the source of truth, okay? And so he was followed by those type of people, and then he was followed by the types of people that belonged to the religion of the time, but also rejected him because what he taught didn't go in accordance to their beliefs, in their system. Okay, so these two types of people rejected the Christ or the teachings of the Christ, and then there were, of course, his close disciples, which had direct experience of the teachings. Okay. And then under here, you also had the type of people that used to follow him just to see the miracles, right? They were impressed by the miracles, but they didn't take on the task of actually doing the work, the spiritual work, okay? Okay, so then the sensual mind, like I said, rejects the unknown. It has fear of the unknown, okay? And it's a very closed mind. And the type of science that we have right now comes from a a degeneration of what we'll call what it's called Aristotle's um, inductive system. Okay, there were two types of system that came about from the Socratic school. One of them was, of course, Plato, who was a disciple of Socrates, and then Aristotle, who was a disciple of Plato, right? So Plato came up with something called a deductive system, and Aristotle said, or started what he called the inductive system. Basically, what Aristotle was saying is, we will start with what we can see, what we can perceive. So we'll start with the five senses to try to get to the origin of this physical manifestation, right? What Plato proposed another way of looking at things. He said we should start with the unknown to try to comprehend what we are seeing, what we're perceiving. Okay, this is why I have this painting right here, which is the School of Athens by Raphael. This one represents Plato, even though he put the face of Da Vinci here, and this one represents Aristotle. This is why Plato is pointing upwards and Aristotle is pointing down. He said, we'll start with the world of five senses to comprehend things. And Plato is saying, no, we'll start from the unknown. We'll start from above, right? That's a very interesting painting. It's got a lot of philosophers and people in history. There's like Zoroaster, there's Socrates somewhere in there, etc. Raphael was from the school of Neoplatonism, right? So he used his art to give teachings that are related to the internal path. Okay? So like I said before, the type of science that we have right now, it's a degeneration of Aristotle, right? That says only accept the five senses, which is not what Aristotle said, but this is what we are now, right? Whatever we can hear, feel, touch, etc., is what we'll accept. Okay. All right. So then from this, again, we begin to form theories, dogmas, beliefs, ideas of what might be, right? So then this is where we have the intermediate mind, or this is the aspect of the mind, that aspect of the mind, where we have what we call blind faith. Okay, blind faith meaning I'll just believe because it makes sense and because other people are telling me, right? People that I consider more intelligent and professionals in the field, etc., right? Which could be priests or they could be scientists, right? There's an interesting scientist out there that's called Rupert Sheldrake, and he compares science, or he says that unfortunately science has become like a new religion, where the research that is being or the things that we're finding out through that type of science is research that's pointed towards maintaining the status quo, right? So they reject anything that has to do with metaphysical aspects, with like I said, with remote viewing, with anything that has to do with the soul, etc., etc. Okay, and this is because, of course, there are companies, big companies with a lot of money that fund these research. So most of the research that you'll find out there are, have a particular agenda to maintain the status quo. So the intermediate mind, or this blind faith, which could be, for example, a religious person accepts things without experiencing them, right? So this could be whether you believe in the story that science tells you or the story that religions tell you. Yeah.
I wanted to share this with you. I'm studying now massage therapy. I'm studying like anatomy. And in the textbook, it says that the coccyx is considered to be vestigial. So it's like of no use. It doesn't go any deeper than
right.
that. That's like so incredible. I can't
there are a lot of, they have a lot of things like that about the body. Like there are parts that
they don't even
you just happen to have it, but there's really no use. Like it's got to have some use.
Yeah, they don't even write like that. They don't know that they're not sure yet because it's a college textbook. They write that it's of no use.
Right, and it's that attitude, right? Yeah. Like one of the things that Rupert Sheldrake points out is that science has this idea that we already know most of the truth, and we just need to fill in little details. When it's actually the opposite, right? It's a very arrogant way of looking at life. And I mean, even some of the greatest minds actually point at the fact that we need to be humble and we really always need to be reconsidering and reevaluating all of our concepts, right? So anyway, what this type of mind lacks is the specific techniques to experience things, right? So here in Gnosis, we say you are a soul and you have a physical body. So we're going to give you specific techniques that you can use to see yourself as a soul and to see your physical body or yourself separated from your physical body, right? So meditation techniques, the sleep yoga, all of these things, okay? That will, and of course, you'll have an experience after you dedicate yourself to the practice and you develop concentration and discipline, right? Okay, so this type of mind, like I said, this is what in the Christian mythology they're referred to as the Pharisees. Those that lead this kind of superficial spirituality, right? They're also, the Christ refers to them also as hypocrites, right? They go to temple, they go to the temple. You see them there every Sunday, but they don't really practice what they teach, or they don't practice what they preach, right? It's like a cloak, okay? And there is no true inner change, right? This is one of the things that I forgot who said it, but it was Anthony de Mello. He says for the difference between the scientist and the mystic is that when the scientist receives knowledge, it doesn't change him. But when the mystic receives knowledge or experiences knowledge, it changes him, right? But the science that we have now doesn't bring about any true inner change. And this is because we don't really comprehend the information that we're receiving, or we're not taking it in with the consciousness. We're only taking concepts, ideas, theories, right? Okay, so, and we also have in society false idols or role models, right? People that are like the priests of society, and they say what's good, what's bad, etc., etc. But they also are very superficial, right? I don't know, role models, like let's say people in government, right? The president's supposed to be the most important person in the nation, the most ethical, the most virtuous, etc., etc. And governors and all this, but they also have their crooked side, right? They have this other aspect that comes out. Yeah.
Is the intermediate mind the mind that most people have in the world?
Well, we have all three, right? But we are usually locked in between these two, the intermediate and the essential mind, okay? And I'm not saying that these two minds are a bad thing, okay? You need them because you need your essential mind to receive data, right? At least until you open this mind, you need those two, right? You need to begin with a sensorial input, and then you need an idea or a concept about what that is, right? Whether that concept could say, well, this is this, and it could lead you to experience that. So then you have to start, with something, okay? So then the essence is to receive information to begin to open the interior mind, okay? And the interior mind is what allows us to comprehend what we're experiencing, right? The intermediate mind allows us to understand, but the interior mind allows us to comprehend. That's the difference between the mind and the consciousness, right? When we open the interior mind, the consciousness becomes present, okay? So when your consciousness becomes present, then you comprehend what's happening. And this is why he who perceives things with the consciousness changes, because now you know.
It's experience.
Okay? Yeah, you
It's direct
experience. Right. It's what we call true faith. Okay, so Gnosis, faith is true knowledge. It's direct experience of the truth. Okay, it's not just, that's what we make a difference between true faith and beliefs, or what we call blind faith, right? Most people say, I believe in God, I believe in this, I believe in that. But, if you believe, there is still some doubt. Like, you're not 100% sure. When you have faith, okay? Okay, cool. This type of mind gives us discernment. Okay, this is our truly scientific mind. It gives us scientific doubt. Okay, and what we mean by scientific doubt is a mind that questions things but doesn't close itself to anything. Okay, it says, I never heard of this. It sounds like it could be true, or it sounds like it's not true. But I'm gonna see if there's more research to back it up, and I'm gonna see if I can experience what they're claiming. Okay, and that's what's important. It's this discernment within ourselves, not just reject or accept based on if it makes logical sense, right? And this is why in the Gnostic tradition, we don't expect anyone to just believe what we're saying here. The point is to guide you so that you can begin to experience those things, okay? Because in the end, if you don't have an experience of anything that we're teaching you here, then you're just gonna leave and you're gonna go to another school and you're gonna start reading other books that will help you experience something, right? That's what we're looking. We're looking for experience. Okay, so this is the aspect of our mind that is actually open. This gives us, an open mind. In the Christian tradition, this is what we refer to as our internal Thomas, right? Thomas being one of the 12 disciples of Jesus, right? Each one of those disciples had a particular quality, okay? In the same way that those external disciples or archetypes took place or were here, we also have those things within ourselves. So we also have the Christ within ourselves, which is that source of light, that truth, and then he surrounds himself with 12 disciples, which are inner aspects of the consciousness. So Thomas represents the scientific mind, right? This is why Thomas is the disciple that is always asking. And he says, and the disciples come to him and they say, "Oh, the master resurrected," and he says, "I won't believe it until I can see him and put my finger in his wound," right? So he only believes true direct experience. That's where he forms all of his concepts about life, right? Okay, this mind gives us imagination, inspiration, or intuition, or rather, this mind is opened with imagination, with inspiration, and with intuition. Okay, this is what this inner mind grants us: the ability to intuit or to grasp the truth, bypassing even reasoning. Okay, and this is the main reason why mystics, when they experience some truth, they have trouble explaining that truth to people that have to these types of minds, because how can you explain something that they cannot perceive right away, right? I actually just found out an article a few days ago about these scientists that are using this new type of telescope. Okay, that they were the purpose of the telescope was to see antimatter in space, out in outer space, right? And they found out that, or they began to see that particles of antimatter, and they began to see that they were what they're calling entities floating around in our atmosphere. Okay, living entities. Okay, I don't know, but maybe in the spiritual tradition or an esoteric tradition, something that you can call, spirits or consciousness or, other things of that sort, angels, etc. And now these scientists are saying, we found this, but it's not my purpose to tell the people what they are. My purpose is just to do the research and then give it to the government. The government will tell you what those things are, right? And the scientist, which is this guy from MIT and Harvard University, he says it's important for, I'll provide this information to the government and I'll let the government decide what they, or tell us what those things are. He says because these entities are actually surveilling us and taking information and all this stuff, right?
They're the ones that came from lightning? The one that was coming from lightning?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
There's that article where they use the camera and you can see like these little specks in the light. Like
maybe. I'll show the video after.
I think I was watching it the other day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very recent
Yeah.
research, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of.
And you know there are a lot of interesting scientific research and they just kind of come across with these things kind of out of random, you know. They're not really looking for that, and then they come out with or they find this interesting aspect. So anyway, the internal Thomas or interior mind is where we can or where we find gnosis, which is knowledge, ethics, and true happiness, right? For this, we need to work on the technique of psychological thinking, okay? To open our interior mind, of course, through we need to great tools, meditation, and this aspect of psychological thinking. I think I've touched on this last week or so, which is to always think psychologically about the circumstances of your life, right? Most people think that the circumstances in your life are just random things, and we all feel as victims, and that's why we get depressed and we cry and we blame the external world for everything. But in essence, the life that you have is the life that you've created. Okay, so when you begin to think psychologically and something happens to you, first of all, you try to understand, to comprehend what's happening within your psyche, right? Why am I thinking this way? Why am I feeling this way? Why do I act this way, etc. Right? And this kind of psychological thinking will begin to open this interior mind. This is what we talked about last week about the three brains, and I said that it's important for us to begin to develop superior emotion, or that emotional brain, okay? Because the emotional brain, or that emotional aspect, is what gets us, what brings us inspiration, right? And we also said that the superior intellectual center gives us creative imagination, okay? Which in the end brings us intuition, okay? So in these types of studies, we try to reach the truth or get in touch with the truth, not only with just the sensual and the intermediate mind or just by thinking about things, but rather by perceiving or having direct experience of whatever it is that we're studying, okay? And most things come from intuition. Last week we talked about how to solve problems, for instance. Right? We said that for the most part, like we have this problem and we have this battle of the mind, this battle within the mind, right? We have this problem, we're trying to find a solution to the problem, and we don't find it. Later, when you're taking a shower 2 days, 2 days later or something, the answer just pops into your head, right? That's what intuition is about. You kind of intuit that answer, that truth. And this is why Plato says that we should use a deductive system. He says all of the answers are out there, or the truth is there in the unknown. So we should go to the unknown, or open ourselves to the unknown to try to make sense of what we know, right? So, of course, when if we want to use that system, we need to learn how to make our mind serene, our mind passive, so that the interior mind begins to open up. Okay. Again, the mind is an energy. It's a substance that we can use to perceive things. Okay. And once we perceive something, then it is the job of the mind to project that so that you can see it, right? So when you open yourself and you relax your mind, you put your mind in a serene state, in a passive and receptive state, then you can receive a particular type of truth, and that truth will be projected as images or as a voice, right? Or simply as a hunch of what you need to do in a particular moment, etc. Right? I think we've all had those experiences where, I mean, sometimes you have a dream where, they tell you clearly, you should do this, or this is what's going to happen, or whatever, right? Or in a moment, you just know what you have to do. For example, when we're locked into two options, right? Usually, the first option that we feel is the correct one, but a lot of times, like we feel the intuition to do something, and then the intermediate mind comes and says, no, wait a second, if you do that, and this is going to happen, blah, 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 and then you find an excuse, and no, I'm just going to go with this option, right? So in this path, we begin to open ourselves to intuition, right? To allow your intuition to guide you, and not just the intermediate mind, because again, the intermediate mind gets all of its, gets his way of thinking, his way of perceiving the world through only what we've experienced externally, right? So nothing new can come out of this type of thinking, right? Only new things can come out of when things that you haven't experienced. So how can you open yourself to new ideas that you can formulate based on your experiences, right? You have to open your mind to this new thing. This is why Plato talked about, the world of ideas. So getting in touch with that world, with that world of archetypes or ideas. Okay, this is in essence today's lecture.
Wait, Christian, are you saying because I believe that, for example, in my experience throughout the day, I could have these three types of minds, experience all three of them just in one day. You know what I mean? And not necessarily just one of them. So is it possible that we can have that?
Yeah, throughout the day. Yeah, I mean, and listen, usually
on different days of
The whole time they're working,
huh?
the whole time they are
Yeah.
working inside of us.
It's pretty rare for us to have this mind awaken. Okay, this is why.
It doesn't happen a lot. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it requires concentration or will to open that, or sometimes it happens spontaneously. Okay, I don't know. We watched The Peaceful Warrior. You all familiar with that movie? Well, this guy, his master, he goes to a bridge and he tells him, all right, I have something to do. Can you give me this teaching really quick? Okay, so the guy just throws him off the bridge. It's like, what? So this guy comes all, angry. He says, what's up? What do you do that for? It's like, well, you told me to make it quick, to give you the teaching quick, right? And so he comes all wet and stuff. Like, what's the point? He says, well, tell me something. What were you thinking when you were falling? He says, nothing. It's like, all right, what were you thinking about your dad? Were you thinking about that important thing that you have to go and do? And he said, no. It's like, yeah, exactly. You were there in the moment, present. You were completely aware of yourself and your environment in that moment, right? So, that was a great way of teaching.
You said something that is a key, that is working into the psychological.
Yes,
You said
the psychological thinking.
Right.
Right.
Which is
So
the key to make these minds to
yes,
calm down and
let's get to
understand.
that because that's important. So I was gonna say, you sense something, right? We'll call it an impression. You sense something, and right away, your intermediate mind begins to try to make sense and tell you what's happening. Okay? Now, our minds and our senses are very deceptive, right? Sometimes we see things that are not really there. We hear things that are not there, or you hear someone call your name, but it was a random sound, etc., right? There are, there are a bunch of examples of this in scientific studies on how we can't really trust our senses. Okay, they're very deceiving. So then, at every moment, you want to ask yourself, what am I perceiving? Is what I'm perceiving now in this moment true? Or is it just my imagination or a particular perception of the truth, right? You walk into a room, there's someone there that you don't like, and right away, you feel something, and that puts you in an uncomfortable state, right? In a flight or flight state, and that doesn't allow you to live the moment fully, right? To experience other things that are happening in that room that you're completely missing out on, right? So this is why the guy throws him off the bridge, right? Because in that moment he forgets about all of the theories and trying to make sense, like, oh, that's a lamp, it's a black lamp, right? Well, is it really? This is why, the whole thing about the philosophers, like, always ask yourself, really, what's happening? Are you here present, or are you dreaming, right? What makes you think that you are actually alive? Maybe when you die, you'll actually awake from that dream and say, oh, what a nightmare I had, Or if you had a good life, and you say, "Oh, can't believe that's over," and then you want to go back, and then you go back, and that's what happens.
Or where is this feeling or this thought coming
Right.
from? Why?
Right. So then always ask yourself, like Aristotle, right? You can use both systems. I'm sensing something. What is it? Have an open mind, right? Science tells me this is what it is. Okay, so is it really? Right. And then when you begin to question everything like that, you begin to open this interior mind. This is why Socrates always said, the more I know that I know not. Right? He basically said, I filled my head with a bunch of theories, but that's all it is. I don't really know anything. I haven't experienced anything. So that's why they say that he really annoyed people because he kept asking them questions and questions and questions. Like, oh, you think that's that, and how about this, and what about that, and blah, blah, blah. And then until the point where people just break down and say, I don't know, can't, right? And that's what we should do. We should always ask ourselves, is this real? What, all of these things. So, yeah, you had a question?
No, what I was going to say was that I think that the difference between the interior mind and the intermediate and central is that the central and intermediate mind are more influenced by, like, when you were growing up. So I feel like the central mind is influenced by, like, your schools and stuff, because they have to follow a certain criteria. It's an institution that's generally controlled by the government, if you want to call it that, or whatever it is. But the intermediate mind, I think, can also be influenced a lot by your parents, because, for example, me, I come from a Catholic household. So since I was young, I've always been told, like, Catholics, this, that, and you don't ever question that.
Right, yeah.
Because it's your mom, and you don't want to, like, go against her. But at the end of the day, you have your own brain, and you have your own experiences, so you shouldn't, you shouldn't go just by what they're telling you. You should go out there and experience, and that's when you open up the interior mind, is when you actually take the initiative to explore yourself instead of those influences.
Or when you cut yourself, your mind wandering to nowhere, and you cut it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you start having a real dialogue to yourself, like psychological dialogue.
Yeah.
For whatever situation or emotion you're having, right?
Yeah. This is why I think sometimes to enter this, actually it's a big part of entering or opening this interior mind is to go from the two extremes. And this is, I guess that's one of the aspects of the interior mind, the intermediate mind that I forgot to mention, is that that duality, that pendulum, right? We're presented with this theory, with this idea, and then we begin to see that there's really no truth for it, so we go to the complete opposite, right? So we go from being believers into atheists, right? Which I think, I don't know, a lot of us went through, like I went through that. I was like, what, are you an atheist now? I'm getting somewhere. I was trying to make sense. Like, does that really make sense? The literal story doesn't make sense. If you interpret the Bible from a literal point of view, like, forget it. You drive yourself crazy, and there's no way to make sense of it. So then you go to the opposite extreme, and then you say, no, forget it. That's not true, etc., etc. So you experience both aspects. And then the interior mind is the one that allows you to bring the synthesis from that, right? From the thesis to the antithesis, and then you get the synthesis, right? Which is the truth that is hidden within that polarity. And Gnosticism, we say that the truth usually lies in the middle of those two extremes, right? There is some truth in there, and there's some truth in here, but there's also a lot of false in that part and falsehood in this one, right? So yeah, I think that's very important, and that's what psychological thinking is about. You begin to develop discernment, okay, and then one day you have an experience where, I don't know, hopefully you will all have, where you actually see yourself and your physical body there, and you say, oh, what's this? What's happening? Right? And then you think you're dead, and maybe you'll get afraid, and then you go back to your physical body. Right? Yeah, it happens. Okay, cool. Another question?
Yeah, could you describe how it would look to have, like, an ideal mind? Like, our goal to like, have our mind.
Like, what's the correct use of the mind?
using these three minds.
Okay. So the ideal use of the mind is to have your mind in a completely receptive and neutral state. Meaning that what you're perceiving is not being colored by theories, dogmas, beliefs, etc. Okay? So you're perceiving things, and then with the consciousness, you comprehend how those things that you're perceiving, okay, relate in a wholesome way in your life. How everything that you sense and perceive is part of the whole. It's part of this universal, you know, myth that you're going through. This universal consciousness, etc. The intermediate mind, or that aspect of the mind, gives you the ability to sense and feel yourself in unity with everything. Okay, and this is why, you know, we have this experience of, or these in the Buddhist tradition, they say, you know, to feel yourself at one with everything. When you feel that oneness, when you feel connected with everything, you don't feel separate, right? Which is what the intermediate mind brings about. It gives this sense of separateness. And from that sense of separateness comes hate, right? Because when you feel at one with something, there's just love, right? You are, like, everything is one. We're all one. So you wouldn't hate an aspect of yourself, right? If you see the person in front of you as, I don't know, an extension of yourself, as your arm, you wouldn't hate your arm, right? Like, you feel it part of you. So that's the pristine, or the most adequate state of the mind, to be completely receptive and neutral, right, or unbiased, okay, to perceived objectivity. Now, that's the thing. A lot of people could say that there is really nothing objective in the universe, and that everything is subjective, because everything has to do with the way that you perceive things. And that's exactly what I'm trying to say. You perceive things because you have been conditioned to perceive things in a particular way, right? We have been conditioned to perceive everything from the point of view of Catholicism, or from Buddhism, etc., etc. Right? So an ideal state of the mind is it's a mind that does not judge what we're perceiving. Okay? Does that make sense? It's a little hard to kind of explain it, because it's kind of like an abstract concept, and something that we just have to experience, right? One last thing. This is why it's important for us to read, to watch movies, documentaries that fall under what we call objective art. The type of art and the type of things that will trigger your inspiration, your imagination. Okay, so that you can intuit the great mysteries of life. This is why it's important to read, like, the biographies of the great spiritual masters, right? This is why religions tell us, you know, spiritual stories, and what Jesus did and what Krishna did, and all these, to have this kind of to open ourselves and to become inspired by those behaviors, right? By those actions. Okay. Cool. All right. So let's do some meditation.
Yeah.
Great.